What if I told you that in the Middle Ages, people didn't just eat bread, they used it as plates, or that some believed holding a magical stone could cure ailments? These are just a glimpse into the strange and wonderful world of medieval customs, where everyday life was filled with rituals, beliefs, and traditions that might seem bizarre to us today. But these forgotten practices aren't just odd quirks, they're windows into how people lived, loved, and made sense of their world centuries ago. From the way they dined to how they healed, every custom tells a story about the values, fears, and creativity of medieval society. And that's exactly what we're about to explore together. Think about the last time you sat down for a meal. You probably reached for a plate without a second thought. But in the Middle Ages, a thick slice of stale bread called a trencher was the original disposable dish. After soaking up the juices of a hearty stew, it was either eaten or given to the poor. This simple act reveals so much: resourcefulness, social hierarchy, even the rhythms of daily life. And that's just one example. Across Europe, people carried charms to ward off evil, celebrated holidays with riotous festivals, and followed rules of courtesy that would make modern etiquette seem lax. These customs weren't just habits, they were the fabric of a world where magic felt real, community was everything, and survival often depended on tradition. So why do these forgotten practices matter today? Because they remind us that history isn't just about kings and battles, it's about the ordinary moments that shaped how people thought and lived. Over the next 25 customs, we'll uncover the surprising, the humorous, and the downright baffling traditions of the Middle Ages. You'll discover why people danced in cemeteries, how love potions were concocted, and what medieval parents used as baby monitors. Each one is a piece of a larger puzzle, showing how our ancestors navigated life's challenges with ingenuity and sometimes a touch of superstition. So settle in, this isn't just a history lesson, it's a journey into the heart of what makes us human, through the lens of a time that feels both distant and strangely familiar. Ready to step into the past? Let's begin. Picture this: you're a guest at a lavish medieval feast, seated at a long wooden table piled high with roasted meats, steaming stews, and savory pies. But when the food arrives, there's something missing: your plate. Instead, a thick slab of stale bread is placed before you, hollowed out slightly to hold your meal. This was the humble trencher, the original edible dish that turned every meal into a zero-waste affair. Far from being a last resort, these bread plates were a clever solution in an era when fine ceramics were luxury items and even wooden dishes took skill to craft. Wealthy hosts might serve multiple courses on fresh trenchers, while poorer households reused theirs until they fell apart, literally soaking up every drop of flavor along the way. The trencher wasn't just practical, it was a social barometer. After a grand banquet, the juice-soaked bread might be passed to servants, or the hungry gathered outside the gates, turning leftovers into an act of charity. Some trenchers even doubled as napkins, with guests wiping greasy fingers on the bread before eating it. And if you think this sounds messy, you're right. But medieval dining was a hands-on affair where etiquette allowed for a lot more, let's call it, enthusiasm. This tradition left its mark in surprising ways. The term trencherman still describes someone with a hearty appetite, a nod to those who could demolish both meal and plate. In England, a variation called brewies saw trenchers soaked in broth as a peasant staple. But as pottery became cheaper and metal utensils more common, the bread plate slowly vanished from tables, though it lingered in monasteries and rural areas for centuries. What faded, though, was more than just a quirky custom. It was a whole philosophy of eating, where nothing went to waste and every bite told a story of ingenuity. So next time you toss out a paper plate, spare a thought for the medieval diner who'd have eaten theirs. Their solution might seem strange today, but in a world without disposable culture, it was nothing short of brilliant. Imagine spending months carefully carving a single wooden spoon, not for cooking, but as a declaration of love. In medieval Wales, this was the ultimate romantic gesture, where suitors poured their hearts into crafting elaborate love spoons adorned with symbols of devotion. These weren't just utensils, they were wearable promises, each twist and notch carrying hidden meaning. A chain design meant, "I wish to be bound to you forever," while hearts spoke of affection and keys signaled, "You hold the key to my heart." The more intricate the carving, the more serious the intent. A clumsy spoon might earn laughter, but a masterful one could win a bride. What made these tokens so special was the time and skill behind them. In an era without mass-produced jewelry, a hand-carved spoon demonstrated patience, craftsmanship, and dedication, qualities valued in a lifelong partner. Some designs even included puzzles, like interlocking rings that could only be separated by twisting them just right, proving a suitor's cleverness. Rural Welsh communities kept this tradition alive well into the 19th century, long after printed valentines appeared elsewhere. Even today, love spoons hang in Welsh homes as heirlooms, their symbols whispering centuries-old vows across generations. But romance in the Middle Ages wasn't always so sweetly symbolic. While Welsh lovers carved spoons, others turned to, let's say, more adventurous customs. Picture a young man scaling a castle wall to steal a kiss from his beloved's window, or worse, presenting her with a lock of his hair mixed with ground-up beetles as a love charm. Compared to those, a carefully crafted spoon seems downright civilized. The endurance of love spoons reveals something profound. In a world of fleeting digital affection, there's still magic in a tangible, handmade promise. Each dent in the wood told a story, a slip of the knife here, a moment of inspiration there, transforming simple timber into a map of the heart. Next time you see a wooden spoon, look closer. It might just hold more than soup. It could carry the echoes of a love story centuries in the making. Now imagine standing at a medieval graveside as a shadowy figure approaches. A gaunt stranger who hasn't been invited to mourn, but hired to perform a task no one else would dare. This was the Sin Eater, a solitary outcast who carried the spiritual burdens of an entire community on their shoulders. As the coffin lay open, a loaf of bread would be placed on the deceased's chest, sometimes accompanied by a bowl of ale. The Sin Eater would consume these offerings in solemn ritual, believed to ingest not just food, but the sins of the departed, freeing their soul from purgatory. In that moment, this shunned individual became the most vital person in the village, both feared and indispensable. The paradox of the Sin Eater reveals so much about medieval society. They were often beggars or drifters, paid in meager coins or scraps of food for their service, yet their role was sacred. Communities relied on them to cleanse the dead of moral stains, but they were forbidden from mingling with the living afterward, treated as spiritual lepers tainted by the sins they'd swallowed. Some accounts describe Sin Eaters crossing themselves afterward or spitting 3 times to ward off lingering corruption. In Wales, where the practice was most documented, they might even be chased from the churchyard with sticks, their work done but their presence still unwelcome. What's fascinating is how this ritual reflects medieval views of sin as something almost tangible, a weight that could be transferred, like passing a physical object. Contrast that with modern funerals, where grief is shared collectively, and forgiveness comes through words or silent reflection. The Sin Eater's disappearance wasn't just about changing religious beliefs. It marked a shift in how we conceptualize guilt, community, and redemption. Yet traces of the tradition linger. In some alpine villages, mourners still place bread near the dead for their journey, while certain cultures share funeral meals to symbolically carry part of the departed's burdens together. Even the phrase, "eating someone's sins," survives in folklore, a ghostly echo of a practice that once bridged the visible and invisible worlds. This eerie custom leads us deeper into medieval supernatural beliefs. If people trusted a stranger to cleanse souls, what other rituals did they turn to when facing the unknown? From charms against witchcraft to midnight visits from the dead, the next forgotten custom reveals how thin the veil between worlds truly seemed. In the year 1386, a French court sentenced a soul to death by hanging not for wandering the streets, but for the murder of a child. This wasn't an isolated event. Medieval Europe saw countless animals dragged before judges, from pigs accused of infanticide to locusts charged with crop destruction, even mice put on trial for chewing through church vestments. These weren't metaphorical trials, they followed strict legal procedures. Animals had court-appointed advocates, witnesses gave testimony under oath, and verdicts were rendered with solemnity. A rooster in Basel was burned at the stake for the crime of laying an egg believed to be a sign of witchcraft. In Savoy, a group of weevils were excommunicated after ruining vineyards. What seems absurd today made perfect sense in a world where nature and morality were deeply intertwined. Medieval thinkers saw animals as moral agents capable of sin, influenced by the same forces that tempted humans. A pig that killed a child wasn't just dangerous, it was guilty, deserving punishment to restore divine order. Some trials even dressed animals in human clothing during executions, as if to emphasize their culpability. The rituals surrounding these events reveal a fascinating duality. Animals were both property and spiritual beings, subject to both earthly laws and cosmic justice. Yet there was practical logic beneath the symbolism. Animal trials often served as public safety measures, a way to formally remove dangerous creatures from communities while reinforcing social norms. The spectacle of a hog swinging from the gallows sent a clear message about consequences, whether you had 2 legs or 4, and sometimes these trials were acts of desperation. When infestations destroyed crops, farmers turned to the courts as a last resort, hoping legal condemnation might prompt divine intervention against pests. The legacy of these trials lingers in unexpected ways. Modern animal rights debates echo medieval questions about responsibility. Just in reverse, now we ask not whether animals can sin, but whether they deserve legal protections. Even the term scapegoat traces back to ancient rituals of transferring blame onto creatures, but animals weren't always defendants in medieval Europe. They also starred in joyous traditions like the Festival of the Ass, where a donkey was led into church draped in finery to commemorate its role in the Nativity. From courtroom to cathedral, animals occupied a space between the mundane and the miraculous, neither fully beast nor fully symbolic, but forever central to how medieval people understood their world. This blend of reverence and retribution sets the stage for our next custom, where the line between punishment and celebration grows even thinner. For 12 wild days each winter, the rigid order of medieval society turned upside down, not by accident but by design. In great halls across Europe, a peasant or low-ranking servant would be crowned the Lord of Misrule, handed a mock scepter and given absolute, if temporary, authority to command nobles, reverse roles, and orchestrate chaos. Picture a kitchen boy ordering his lord to dance, or a minstrel fining ladies for being too sober. This wasn't anarchy, it was a carefully choreographed rebellion, where laughter became the glue holding feudal tensions together. The Lord of Misrule presided over a world turned topsy-turvy. Servants sat at the high table while masters served them. Church services featured bawdy parodies, and normal rules of decorum were suspended. In some regions, men dressed as women and animals were brought into churches like the English Feast of Fools, where choir boys brayed like donkeys during Mass. These antics had ancient roots tracing back to Roman Saturnalia, but in the Middle Ages they took on new urgency. For people bound by birth to their social station, this sanctioned disorder provided rare psychological relief. A peasant could jokingly tax his lord's wine without fear of punishment, and nobles could endure the ribbing because everyone knew come Twelfth Night, the proper order would snap back like a released bowstring. Modern carnival cultures, from New Orleans' Mardi Gras to Germany's Carnival, owe much to this medieval pressure valve. But there's a crucial difference. Today's festivities are largely secular, while medieval revelry was deeply entwined with faith. The Church tolerated and sometimes participated in these excesses precisely because they preceded the austerity of Lent. It was as if society needed to exhale before holding its breath for 40 days. Yet not everyone approved. Reformers grumbled about the abominable plays of the season, and by the 17th century, Puritan crackdowns had extinguished many Lord of Misrule traditions. But the impulse they channeled never truly vanished. From corporate, casual Fridays to comedy roasts of authority figures, we still ritualize minor rebellions, proof that even the strictest hierarchies need moments where the fool wears the crown. This taste for festive chaos sets the stage for another winter custom, where merriment took an even darker turn. Imagine a night when the dead were said to walk, and the living disguised themselves not to mock power but to escape it. In the flickering candlelight of Chartres Cathedral, a desperate woman knelt before a glass case containing what pilgrims believed was the belt of the Virgin Mary. With trembling hands, a priest would wrap this sacred cloth around her waist while prayers filled the air not for healing but for creation. This was girdle measuring, one of medieval Europe's most poignant fertility rituals, where faith and biology intertwined in ways that might baffle modern medicine. From England to Italy, shrines offered contact with holy belts, rings, and even saintly toenails, each believed to transfer divine fertility to barren women. Some accounts describe hopeful couples traveling for weeks to reach these sacred sites, their journeys fueled by equal parts devotion and despair. The practice reveals much about medieval views of the body. Unlike today's clinical fertility treatments, conception was seen as a mystical process, one where spiritual blockages could be as real as physical ones. The girdle's symbolism was potent. It echoed both marital bonds and the womb's embrace, while its holy origin promised heavenly intervention. At Paris' Sainte-Chapelle, women could measure themselves against a relic said to be the Virgin's actual waistline, as if proximity to her form might spark their own fertility. Records from Canterbury describe pilgrims renting birthing girdles, long strips of parchment inscribed with prayers that could be worn like belts during pregnancy. Yet beneath the piety lay shrewd observation. Many fertility shrines were built atop ancient springs or pagan sites associated with motherhood, suggesting the church repurposed older beliefs. And sometimes it worked, not through miracles, but because the journey itself reduced stress, or because the ritual's timing aligned with a woman's cycle. A 15th century manuscript even advises combining girdle measuring with herbal remedies, showing how superstition and proto-science coexisted. The contrast with modern fertility care couldn't be starker. Where today's treatments rely on hormones and microscopes, medieval women placed hope in objects that had touched holiness. Yet both eras share something profound: the ache of unmet longing and the lengths to which people will go when creation becomes a prayer. Some fertility clinics near ancient shrines report that patients still visit both not because they've abandoned science, but because hope has many doors. This blending of body and belief sets the stage for another medieval health custom where the line between medicine and magic grew even thinner. Your medieval doctor wouldn't ask you to say, "Ah," they'd ask you to pee in a flask. In an era before X-rays or blood tests, urine was the ultimate diagnostic tool, scrutinized with the intensity of a fortune teller reading tea leaves. Physicians carried ornate glass vessels called maculas, shaped like miniature towers, designed not just to catch samples but to display them like fine wine. A healthy patient's urine was said to resemble pale ale clear and straw-colored, while dark hues signaled danger and cloudy swirls hinted at imbalance. But color was just the beginning. Doctors would swirl the flask, noting bubbles too many meant frenzy of the mind. Let it settle to check for sediment, gritty bits implied kidney stones, and yes, sometimes even taste it. Sweet urine, that might mean diabetes, a connection still acknowledged in the disease's full name, diabetes mellitus or honey sweet flow. This practice, called uroscopy, wasn't medieval quackery, it was cutting-edge science. Manuscripts like the Wheel of Urine divided flasks into 20 sections, each linking shades to specific ailments. Reddish urine might indicate blood disorders, while greenish tones were blamed on liver trouble. Some charts even accounted for seasonal changes, recognizing that dehydration in summer could alter results. The most skilled physicians boasted they could diagnose without seeing the patient at all, relying solely on a messenger's description of the urine's appearance. Yet for all its sophistication, uroscopy had glaring blind spots. Unscrupulous healers might fake diagnoses by adding dyes to samples, while others misinterpreted harmless dietary effects, like beet red pea after a hearty meal. The reliance on urine also led to odd treatments, such as drinking one's own boiled urine as a cure for jaundice. Still, this flawed system planted seeds for modern medicine. The idea that bodily fluids held clues to health persists in today's lab tests, even if we've swapped tasting for test tubes. What's striking is how seriously patients took the ritual. In an age of limited options, handing over a flask felt like surrendering a piece of one's fate. Some wealthy individuals owned personalized maculas decorated with family crests, turning a medical tool into a status symbol. And the practice birthed enduring slang to piss-proud, meant boasting falsely, a jab at charlatans who exaggerated urine readings. But if you think urine was the strangest medieval remedy, just wait. From ground-up mummies prescribed as painkillers to surgeries performed by barbers, the next custom proves that when it came to healing, our ancestors were equal parts inventive and terrifying. In the summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg became a living nightmare, not from plague or war, but from dancing. It began with one woman, Frau Trophia, who stepped into the town square and began twisting her body in jerky, uncontrolled movements. Within days, dozens more joined her, their feet pounding the cobblestones until blood seeped through their shoes. Some collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise and dance again as if pulled by invisible strings. The city council, desperate to stop the madness, did the unthinkable. They hired musicians and cleared a marketplace stage, believing the afflicted needed to dance out the curse. For weeks, the spectacle continued, a macabre ballet of delirious citizens twirling to the very brink of death. This wasn't isolated hysteria. Medieval Europe recorded over a dozen dancing plagues, from the Rhine Valley to Madagascar. In 1374, villagers near the German town of Watchman reportedly danced until their ribs cracked. Witnesses described sufferers screaming for help even as their limbs convulsed. some claiming to see visions of saints or demons mid-spin. Authorities blamed everything from demonic possession to celestial wrath, with one chronicler insisting the dancers had angered the stars. The church alternately prescribed exorcisms or organized processions to appease divine anger, revealing how thin the line was between sacred ritual and pathology. Modern scholars still debate what triggered these outbreaks. The ergot theory, that moldy rye bread caused hallucinations akin to LSD, explains some symptoms but not the compulsive movement. Mass psychogenic illness, where stress manifests physically, fits accounts of communities under famine or persecution. Yet the timing is suspicious. Many plagues erupted during feast days, when ecstatic dancing was already part of celebrations. Could a cultural script for religious rapture have spiraled into something darker? What's undeniable is how these events expose medieval minds straddling two worlds. To sufferers, their flailing bodies weren't just sick, they were battlegrounds for cosmic forces. Towns that built stages for dancers weren't indulging madness. They were trying to ritualize it into something controllable, much like earlier customs where chaos was channeled through the Lord of Misrule. Even the musicians hired in Strasbourg were following an old logic. If disease could be sweated out, perhaps mania could be danced out too. The dancing plagues didn't end with the Middle Ages. As late as 1840, a similar outbreak hit Madagascar, proving these phenomena weren't just medieval superstition but a recurring human mystery. Today, we might diagnose conversion disorder or dopamine imbalances, but the core question remains: how easily can collective belief rewrite the body's rules? This eerie intersection of faith and frenzy sets the stage for another custom where devotion tipped into obsession: the cult of relics, where thousands would trample each other just to touch a saint's finger bone. Imagine waiting for hours in a packed cathedral, shuffling forward inch by inch until you finally knelt before a jeweled slipper, not to admire its craftsmanship, but to press your lips against it in desperate hope. This was the medieval tradition of kissing a bishop's foot, where pilgrims believed that touching holiness could cure ailments, absolve sins, or even resurrect fortunes. The ritual wasn't about the foot itself, but what it represented: a direct line to divine power channeled through the church's earthly hierarchy. In places like Canterbury and Rome, bishops would extend a specially adorned shoe to crowds, sometimes worn thin from thousands of kisses. Some accounts describe pilgrims weeping as they kissed, convinced the act would heal a child's fever or mend a broken leg. But this custom wasn't purely spiritual, it was also political theater. By the 12th century, bishops had learned to weaponize devotion. The most shrewd among them would rotate pairs of shoes, displaying the most tattered ones to prove their popularity and thus their spiritual credibility. Others charged fees for the privilege, turning piety into profit. In one notorious case, a German archbishop allegedly had his foot kissed so often that he developed chronic foot pain, a literal case of power going to one's head or toes. The parallels to modern celebrity culture are striking. Swap the jeweled slipper for a red carpet, and the medieval pilgrim becomes a fan begging for an autograph. Both rituals thrive on proximity to perceived greatness, whether it's holiness or fame. Today's influencers might not promise miracles, but the psychology remains eerily similar. The belief that touching someone special transfers a bit of their magic to you. Yet there's a darker thread here: the way authority figures have always known how to manage reverence. Medieval bishops understood that a well-timed foot kiss could cement their power just as effectively as a papal decree. It's no coincidence that the ritual peaked during times of social upheaval, when people craved tangible connections to stability. This obsession with physical rituals, touching, kissing, holding, sets the stage for another medieval custom where bodies became vessels for the divine. From foot kissing to full-body pilgrimages, the next tradition takes devotion from the symbolic to the extreme. Before you sealed a deal with a signature, you did it with a grip, a firm clasp of hands that meant more than just greeting. In medieval Europe, the handshake wasn't casual. It was a contract written in flesh and bone. Two parties would grasp each other's right hands firmly, fingers wrapping around the wrist, a deliberate check for hidden daggers up sleeves. A clean hand meant clean intentions, and this silent inspection bound agreements as tightly as any parchment. Merchants shook hands over trades, knights before duels, even kings during truce negotiations. The gesture whispered a promise: I come unarmed, and so do you. But the handshake's power went beyond weapon checks. Medieval law codes from England to Germany treated it as a legally binding act, a physical substitute for written oaths in a mostly illiterate world. In some regions, shaking hands over a dispute prevented future lawsuits, as if the touch itself could seal wounds between rivals. The symbolism was visceral. An open hand showed vulnerability, while the grip demonstrated mutual restraint. Even today, traces linger in formal ceremonies. Judges shake hands in courtrooms, diplomats before treaties, all descendants of that medieval moment when trust was literally handed over. Not all cultures relied on hands, though. Viking warriors famously gripped each other's forearms, a move that served the same purpose but with added brute practicality. Forearm grips were harder to fake. No hidden blades, no last-minute slips, and the tighter hold mirrored Norse values of strength and directness. Sagas described chieftains clinching arms so fiercely their fingers left bruises, turning trust into a test of endurance. What's fascinating is how these gestures evolved. The medieval handshake's suspicion faded, leaving behind its shell as a polite greeting, while the Viking arm clasp survives in modern military and fraternal rituals. Both customs reveal a universal truth: before laws, before contracts, humans needed ways to say "I won't hurt you" without saying a word. Yet for all their solemnity, handshakes couldn't always stop betrayal. Some of history's most infamous backstabbings happened just after friendly grips, like the murder of the Burgundian king Sigismund, lured to a feast with handshakes before his assassination. This tension between trust and treachery birthed another medieval custom, the kiss of peace, where enemies pressed lips to prove no poison hid in their mouths. From grip to kiss, every gesture walked the knife's edge between honor and deception. Picture a bustling medieval marketplace where the scent of hops and barley cuts through the air, and towering above the crowd, a woman in a hat so pointed it could pierce the sky. This was the alewife, the original brewmaster whose headgear wasn't just fashion, it was a billboard. In an era before street signs, her hat served a practical purpose, signaling to thirsty customers that her ale was fresh and ready. Made of stiff felt or leather, sometimes striped in bright colors, these conical hats kept hair out of the brew kettle while making their wearers visible across crowded squares. Little did these women know, their practical workwear would one day become the stuff of nightmares, morphed into the archetypal witch's hat by later generations. Ale brewing was one of the few trades where medieval women held real economic power. With beer a daily necessity, safer to drink than water, brewing was domestic work that scaled into commerce. Alewives ran thriving businesses, passing recipes mother to daughter, and some even became minor celebrities. Records from London show women like Agnes the alewife owning multiple taverns, while in York, Brewsters, the female form of brewer, dominated the trade so thoroughly that city laws specifically addressed women who make malt. Their independence ruffled feathers. A 14th-century English poem grumbles about alewives cheating customers with weak brews, painting them as shrewd businesswomen, a backhanded compliment revealing male anxiety. The hat's dark transformation began when male guilds muscled into the industry. As brewing commercialized, women were pushed out by regulations requiring expensive equipment they couldn't afford. The same pointed hat that once symbolized honest trade became a target. By the 16th century, woodcuts depicted ale wives boiling in their own cauldrons in hell, while witch hunters seized on the distinctive headwear as proof of occult ties. The connection wasn't coincidental. Many accused witches were actually village healers or midwives, independent women whose knowledge, like the ale wives, threatened patriarchal control. But the legacy of these brewmistresses lingers in surprising ways. Their hat lives on in children's Halloween costumes, while their trade birthed enduring phrases like bridal from bride ale, the celebratory beer sold at weddings. Even the modern craft beer movement echoes their spirit: small-scale, experimental, and defiantly independent. This collision of commerce and persecution sets the stage for another medieval tradition where women's roles teetered between reverence and fear: the mysterious art of the White Witch, whose herbal cures could heal or horrify depending on who told the tale. On the morning of her wedding, a young German bride would check her dowry one last time, not just for linens or silver, but for something far more practical: a small wooden barrel of homemade beer or wine. This bride's barrel wasn't just a quaint tradition, it was a public test of her worth as a homemaker. The quality of her brew signaled whether she could manage a household's most vital task: keeping her family fed, hydrated, and even a little merry. Guests would sip from the barrel during the feast, their approval or discreet grimaces serving as a verdict on her readiness for marriage. In a world where clean water was scarce, brewing wasn't a hobby, it was survival, and this barrel was her diploma. The symbolism ran deeper than just alcohol. A well-provisioned bride demonstrated foresight, patience, and skill qualities as prized as beauty or obedience. Some regions had strict rules. Bavarian brides might carry 3 barrels, each brewed from different grains to showcase versatility. Others added herbs or honey, turning the drink into a medicinal tonic that doubled as a fertility charm. The ritual was so ingrained that church records from the 15th century list brewing incompetence among valid reasons to annul marriages. Imagine calling off a wedding because the ale tasted sour, a stark reminder of how practicality trumped romance in medieval matchmaking. Fast forward to today, and the bride's barrel has transformed into something almost unrecognizable: the bridal shower. Instead of proving domestic skills, modern brides unwrap blenders and china, gifts that symbolize provision without requiring the giver to churn butter or malt barley. The shift from barrels to bath towels reflects how marriage itself has changed. Where medieval unions were economic partnerships sealed with practical demonstrations, contemporary weddings often celebrate emotional bonds. Yet traces of the old ways linger. Some German-American communities still include miniature barrels in wedding displays, while the Czechs preserve a version called Żeńskie piwo, where the groom must drink a pint of his bride's brewing before saying, "I do." What's lost in this evolution is the communal aspect. A medieval bride didn't just bring a barrel, she brought knowledge passed down through generations, often brewing alongside female relatives in a rite of passage. Compare that to today's registry scanners, where a click replaces hours of kneading, fermenting, and tasting. The trade-off is clear. Convenience has freed women from rigid roles, but it's also severed tangible connections to ancestral skills. This tension between tradition and modernity sets the stage for another marital custom, one where love wasn't just celebrated, but literally tied up in knots. The night air shattered with the clamor of clanging pots, blaring horns, and jeering voices, not a celebration, but a calculated assault on silence. This was the Charivari, medieval Europe's most brutal form of neighborhood watch, where entire villages turned into judge, jury, and noisemaker to punish those who dared defy social norms. An unpopular newlywed couple might wake to find their house surrounded by a grotesque parade, neighbors banging ladles, blowing crude animal horns, even dragging effigies of the couple through the streets. Adulterers faced worse, mock trials where the guilty were paraded backward on donkeys, their clothes splattered with mud, while onlookers hurled rotten food and insults. These weren't spontaneous outbursts, they were meticulously orchestrated humiliations, sanctioned by centuries of tradition. Beneath the racket lay a chilling logic. In societies without formal police forces, the Charivari served as communal law enforcement, using shame as its weapon. Records from 15th century France describe bakers who shortchanged customers being forced to ride through town with loaves tied around their necks, while abusive husbands might find themselves strapped to a wooden plank and dunked in the river, a literal cold shower to cool tempers. The ritual's power came from its participatory nature. Even those who privately disagreed with the punishment would join the noise, fearing they might become the next target if they stayed silent. The parallels to modern online shaming are impossible to ignore. Swap pots and pans for Twitter hashtags, and the medieval mob becomes a viral pile-on. Both thrive on collective outrage, both blur the line between justice and cruelty, and both often spiral beyond their original intent. A Charivari meant to scold a cheating spouse could end with a lynching, just as a social media call-out can destroy lives long after the offense is forgotten. Human nature hasn't changed, only our tools have. Yet there's a key difference. Medieval shamings were at least localized. Victims knew their tormentors, and the ordeal ended when the crowd dispersed. Today's digital Charivaris echo indefinitely, their damage amplified by algorithms that reward spectacle over truth. The Charivari also had built-in limits. Church bells would eventually ring to signal the end of the shaming, a mercy absent from the endless scroll of condemnation online. This tradition's darkest legacy might be how easily cruelty dressed itself in virtue. Charivaris were often framed as moral corrections, just as modern shamings claim to hold people accountable. Both reveal how quickly crowds confuse punishment with righteousness, and how little it takes to turn bystanders into participants. But if you think the Charivari was medieval Europe's harshest public rebuke, wait until you hear what happened to those who broke the ultimate taboos. From sinners' cages to shame masks, the next custom proves humiliation wasn't just a tool, it was an art form. In the moonlit canals of Venice, a young man's voice rose in song beneath an arched stone window no wider than his shoulders, a finestra amorosa, or lover's window, designed for one purpose: to let suitors whisper sweet nothings to their beloveds without ever touching them. These ornate niches, carved into the facades of grand palaces like the Cardoro, were marvels of medieval engineering. Their intricate latticework allowed just enough sound to pass through while maintaining strict visual privacy, and their slender openings ensured no clandestine embraces could occur. A suitor might spend hours composing verses to sing through that stone grillwork, knowing the architecture itself enforced the era's rigid rules of courtship. Romance was allowed, but only at arm's length. The finestra amorosa was more than an architectural quirk, it was a social pressure valve. In a world where marriages were often political transactions, these windows offered a sanctioned space for fleeting intimacy. Noble daughters, cloistered away until their wedding day, could lean close to the lattice and exchange words with admirers under the watchful eyes of chaperones. Some windows even had tiny ledges where love notes or small gifts could be passed, like the silver ring a young Florentine merchant left for his beloved in 1324, now preserved in a Siena museum. The custom was so entrenched that Venetian landlords advertised homes with courting windows as a premium feature, much like modern listings might boast a balcony or garden. But the ritual's elegance concealed darker tensions. These windows weren't just about romance, they were about control. Their design ensured that even in moments of passion, class boundaries held firm. A merchant's daughter wouldn't risk accidentally encouraging a gondolier's advances if she couldn't see his calloused hands. Meanwhile, families used the windows to vet suitors discreetly. A father might note whether a young man's verses quoted Petrarch or bawdy tavern songs before granting permission to formally court. The very stones that enabled connection also policed it, turning architecture into a silent chaperone. The lover's window tradition reveals a paradox at the heart of medieval romance, the constant dance between expression and restraint. Today's dating apps, with their curated profiles and measured replies, aren't so different. Swiping right on a photo is the digital equivalent of singing through a lattice, a way to connect while keeping real vulnerability at bay. Even the secrecy persists. Medieval suitors bribed servants to deliver messages, just as modern daters toggle between active now and last seen statuses to manipulate perception. Yet what's lost without those stone barriers is the tactile poetry of the ritual. The way a suitor's breath might fog the cold marble on a winter's night, or how a lady's perfume lingered in the niche after she withdrew. These windows framed love as something delicate and precious, a thing to be reached for but never quite grasped. And perhaps that's why so many survive today, their empty arches now tourist curiosities. They're monuments to a time when longing had its own architecture, and the space between two people was as deliberate as the stones that shaped it. This tension between secrecy and spectacle sets the stage for another medieval custom where privacy wasn't just guarded, it was weaponized. A gleaming dagger might seem like the perfect gift for a medieval warrior until you learned it could sever your friendship as easily as flesh. Across Europe, giving knives as presents was considered dangerously bad luck, believed to symbolically cut the bonds between giver and receiver. But our ancestors had a clever workaround: tuck a small coin into the sheath or wrap it with the blade, transforming the gift into a sale. That single penny preserved relationships by adhering to an old Norse principle: sharp edges must never pass between friends without payment, even if just symbolic. The custom appears everywhere, from Scottish Highland tales to German guild records, where master craftsmen sold their apprentices' first blades for a token sum to avoid ill fortune. This superstition reveals how deeply medieval minds linked objects with unseen forces. A knife wasn't just a tool, it carried the weight of its potential, to protect or betray, to nourish or harm. Viking sagas warned that gifted blades could turn against their owners unless bought with even a pebble's worth of silver. The coin acted as a spiritual receipt, proving the weapon changed hands through honorable trade rather than careless giving. Some traditions took it further. Russian law insisted the recipient must stab the coin into wood before accepting, while French cutlers whispered blessings over newly sold knives to neutralize their cosmic edge. Modern gift registries still echo this ancient anxiety. Many cultures avoid presenting knives outright. Italian newlyweds receive them purchased with a dollar bill, while Thai traditions bundle scissors with a Satan coin. Even the phrase, "don't look a gift horse in the mouth," shares this wariness, reminding us that generosity and practicality have always danced an uneasy waltz. Yet the knife taboo wasn't medieval Europe's only enduring superstition. From spilled salt requiring a throw over the shoulder to brides wearing something borrowed to confuse evil spirits, these rituals prove how the past lingers in our pockets and pantries. The next custom, however, takes supernatural caution to theatrical heights. with a mirror's reflection deciding life or death. On a windswept Scottish isle, a chieftain gathers his clan around a strange artifact, a smooth stone carved with ancient symbols, its surface worn by generations of desperate hands. As each member places their palm upon it and whispers their hatred for a rival family, they believe something extraordinary is happening. Their collective fury is pooling together, transforming this ordinary rock into a vessel of supernatural vengeance. These were the infamous cursing stones of medieval Scotland, where entire communities weaponized their shared outrage through objects they believed could channel divine punishment. The ritual was deceptively simple. A stone, often from a sacred site like the Isle of Skye St. Columba's Chapel, would be blessed by a priest or druid, then rotated counter-clockwise the direction of misfortune, while each participant recited their grievance. Some stones had hollows where curses could be written on scraps of lead, then melted with heat to seal the magic. The power came from unity. It wasn't enough for one person to wish ill. The curse required the weight of many voices. Records from the MacDonald-MacLeod feud describe warriors carrying a cursed stone into battle, convinced it would make their enemies' blades shatter. In 1625, the Campbells allegedly used one to doom their rivals to die by steel and flame, a prophecy that later haunted the massacre of Glencoe. What's fascinating is how these stones reveal medieval minds grappling with moral dilemmas. By externalizing blame onto an object, clans could wage spiritual warfare without personally staining their souls. The stone became both weapon and alibi, a way to harm while maintaining the fiction of clean hands. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern in everything from online mobs to corporate scandals, where groups diffuse individual guilt through shared action. The cursing stone was medieval Scotland's version of typing, just saying after a vicious tweet, a thin veneer of detachment over naked aggression. But these artifacts weren't unique to Scotland. Ireland had its bull-on stones, where turning a holy stone in a depression could curse or heal depending on intent. The Vikings used knighting poles, wooden stakes carved with runes and smeared with horse blood to summon Odin's wrath. Even Christian Europe had its equivalents. In Normandy, villagers would ring shame bells while naming sinners, believing the sound carried their misdeeds to heaven. What linked these traditions was the conviction that human emotion could be stored in objects like batteries, then unleashed at will. The darkest aspect of cursing stones wasn't their supernatural reputation, it was their very real social function. In close-knit clans, participating in a curse bound people together as tightly as any oath. Refusing to touch the stone could mark you as disloyal, while enthusiastic participation earned respect. This pressure turned personal grudges into collective campaigns, ensuring feuds lasted generations. A 16th-century chronicle from the Hebrides recounts a curse so potent that the targeted family allegedly suffered stillbirths for decades, a tragic example of how belief becomes self-fulfilling prophecy when fear does the work of any spell. Yet for all their fearsome reputation, some cursing stones had escape clauses. A few could be unspun by rotating them clockwise with prayers, while others required the cursed party to return the stone to its original site. These loopholes suggest that even medieval people understood curses were ultimately about control, not magic. The real power lay not in the stone, but in the terrified minds of those who believed in it. This obsession with enchanted objects sets the stage for another custom where ordinary items became extraordinary through the simple act of hiding them in the most unsettling places. Through the foggy streets of medieval London, a lone voice sliced through the silence, not shouting but singing. 12 o'clock and all's well. The town watchman's melodic call was more than just a time check. It was a carefully crafted proof of life. These rhyming verses, repeated at every hour from dusk till dawn, served as an ingenious accountability system. If the watchman missed his cue, the whole neighborhood would know he'd nodded off, and in a world without streetlights or police forces, that lapse could mean disaster. The tradition took different shapes across Europe. German towns favored elaborate rhyming couplets that changed with the seasons, like Nuremberg's winter call. The moon shines bright, the snow lies white, keep your hearth safe this icy night. Some Swiss watchmen even turned their verses into weather reports, advising citizens to shutter windows against approaching storms. The most diligent developed signature flourishes, a trill at the end of a phrase or a particular cadence, so residents could identify their protector by voice alone. In York, records show watchmen competing for the title of Most Tuneful Guardian, with the winner earning an extra barrel of ale. What started as practical necessity blossomed into art. London's Bellman became a nighttime celebrity, his published rhymes so popular they sold as broadsheets. One 17th century collection includes this gem: "Look to your locks, your fire and light, and so good night." A poetic reminder that blended safety advice with charm. The verses also functioned as early news bulletins. After the Great Fire of 1666, watchmen added warnings about careless sparks to their nightly repertoire, turning public service announcements into street performances. Modern security systems have traded poetry for technology, but the core principle remains. Where medieval watchmen used rhyme to prove vigilance, today's motion sensors and surveillance cameras serve the same purpose, just without the folksy flair. Even the classic "All's Well" survives in digital form. Many home security apps still ping users with that exact phrase when no threats are detected. Yet something intangible was lost when algorithms replaced human voices. Those nightly rhymes did more than announce safety. They wove a sonic tapestry of community. A child falling asleep to the watchman's call knew an actual person walked the streets, listening for broken glass or smelling for smoke. In an age of robotic alarms and faceless notifications, we've gained efficiency but sacrificed the comfort of knowing our protectors by their cadence and wit. This deep-rooted connection between safety and storytelling leads us to another medieval innovation, where whole villages transformed into early warning systems using nothing but woven straw and frightened whispers. When death came knocking at a medieval home, families didn't reach for crisp linen sheets or plump pillows. They unrolled a simple bundle of straw across the floor. This was the straw deathbed, a tradition where the dying were laid directly on the earth's humble bounty, their bodies cushioned only by dried stalks that rustled with every labored breath. Far from being a last resort for the poor, this practice crossed class boundaries. Kings and peasants alike were said to have taken their final rest on straw, believing its earthy touch eased the soul's journey into the afterlife. The symbolism was potent. Just as grain fell to the earth to be reborn, so too would the human spirit return to its origins. This ritual reveals a medieval view of death that's worlds apart from our clinical modern approach. Where today's hospital beds prioritize sterility and comfort, the straw bed embraced discomfort as sacred. The scratch of stalks against skin, the faint scent of hay, these weren't hardships to avoid, but sensory anchors keeping the dying tethered to the natural world until their final moment. Some accounts describe families sprinkling fresh straw daily, turning the act into a living countdown. In parts of France, the dying would clutch a sheaf of wheat, its grains later baked into funeral bread for mourners, a tangible loop between life, death, and renewal. Yet the straw bed was just the beginning of death's intricate choreography. As breath faded, families would open windows to release the soul, while others placed coins on the corpse's eyes, not just to weigh down lids, but as toll for the afterlife's ferryman. In Wales, doorways were dismantled to remove the body feet first, ensuring the deceased couldn't look back and haunt the living. These weren't random superstitions. They formed a spiritual roadmap, guiding both the dead and grieving through uncharted territory. What's striking is how these customs balanced pragmatism and poetry. The same straw that cradled the dying would later be burned to purge illness, a practical measure dressed in ritual. Compare that to today's antiseptic deathbeds, where machines beep and tubes coil, creating a barrier between the living and dying that medieval families might find chilling. We've gained medical precision but lost something intangible: the raw, reverent intimacy of ushering a soul onward with nothing but earth's simplest offering. But humility wasn't death's only language. For those who could afford it, the straw ritual gave way to extravagant funerary displays. Like the cadaver tombs of wealthy bishops, their stone effigies carved as rotting corpses to remind onlookers of mortality's inevitability. Even in death, medieval society couldn't escape its hierarchy: straw for the body, gold for the tomb. This duality sets the stage for another farewell custom, where the living didn't just mourn the dead, they dined with them. As the executioner's axe flashed in the morning sun, a single bell began to toll, not from the town square but from the church tower. This was the sin bell, a haunting medieval tradition where churches rang their bells during executions, not to celebrate death, but to summon the living to pray for the condemned soul. In an era when public hangings and beheadings were grim spectacles, the sin bell served as a spiritual lifeline, transforming crowds of gawkers into congregations of mercy. Records from 15th century London describe how the bell's sound would ripple through the streets, prompting even busy merchants to pause and murmur prayers. Some churches kept special execution bells reserved solely for this purpose, their bronze mouths never speaking except when death walked the scaffold. The ritual reveals a profound tension in medieval justice. On one hand, societies believed criminals must pay for their crimes with blood. On the other, Christian teachings demanded compassion for even the worst sinners. The sin bell became the bridge between these ideals, a way to uphold law while acknowledging shared humanity. In Nuremberg, executioners were required to kneel and ask the condemned for forgiveness before striking, while French towns sometimes delayed hangings until a priest confirmed the bell had rung 12 times, symbolizing the apostles' prayers. The message was clear: no soul, no matter how stained, was beyond redemption. Modern capital punishment debates echo this ancient duality. Where medieval societies used bells to soften brutality, today's arguments focus on lethal injections, humane appearance, or last-minute appeals. Both eras grapple with the same question: how can a society punish without losing its own moral compass? The sin bell's legacy lingers in subtle ways, like the tradition of lowering flags to half-mast after executions, or the quiet vigils held outside prisons. These gestures, like the bell, acknowledge that justice and mercy must walk hand in hand, even on the road to the gallows. Yet the sin bell wasn't medieval Europe's only attempt to temper cruelty. From sanctuary churches offering fugitives 40 days protection to benefit of clergy laws that spared literate criminals from hanging, the next custom reveals how mercy often found cracks in even the harshest justice systems. A sudden whistle on a medieval ship could earn you more than dirty looks. It might land you in the brig, or worse, tossed overboard. Sailors and miners shared an ironclad rule: never whistle while you work. To modern ears, this seems like superstition run wild, but in their world, whistling wasn't just noise. It was a direct challenge to the forces of nature. Mariners believed the sound mimicked the howling wind, tempting storms to answer the invitation. Miners swore it echoed the groaning of unstable earth, provoking cave-ins. The punishments for breaking this taboo were severe. Norse crews allegedly tied offenders to the mast during thunderstorms, forcing them to negotiate with the winds they'd supposedly summoned. In Cornish tin mines, whistlers faced fines or even banishment from the tunnels, their colleagues refusing to work alongside them for fear of collapsing walls. This fear wasn't entirely irrational. Both professions relied on interpreting subtle auditory cues, the creak of ship timbers or the crack of shifting rocks where extraneous noise could mask danger. A whistle might drown out the warning sounds of a rigging failure or a distant rock slide. The taboo also served a psychological purpose. In high-risk environments, shared rituals created a sense of control over the uncontrollable. By banning whistling, crews and miners reinforced group discipline, ensuring everyone stayed hyper-alert. The tradition lingers in surprising places today. Theater actors still avoid saying good luck, opting for break a leg to avoid jinxing performances. Surgeons refuse to call cases quiet, fearing it invites chaos. Even builders hesitate to mock unfinished structures with phrases like "this won't fall," a modern echo of whistling's perceived power to tempt fate. But whistling wasn't the only forbidden action. Medieval bakers could lose their hands for selling underweight loaves, while spitting in a German mill risked curses on the grain. Each prohibition reflected a deeper logic, whether hygiene, fairness, or collective survival. The next custom reveals how even laughter could be deadly serious when it masked a revolutionary act. The midwife's hands trembled slightly as she guided the squirming newborn's tiny feet toward the rush-strewn floor, not to clean them but to conduct a sacred test. In medieval Europe, a baby's first voluntary step wasn't just a milestone. It was a prophecy carved in flesh. If the right foot swung forward, families cheered. Here was a future warrior or ruler destined for greatness. A left-footed child, however, sent whispers through the room. This one would tread quieter paths as a scholar, monk, or artist. Some midwives even tied colored threads around each ankle, red for the strong right, blue for the thoughtful left, creating living talismans that shaped parenting choices for years. This belief in footedness reveals how deeply medieval lives were governed by omens. Unlike modern parents who track developmental stages in baby books, families saw every gurgle, sneeze, and yes, first step as encrypted messages from fate. Manuscripts from 15th century France detail elaborate foot-reading rituals, where the angle of a toe or the archer's curve could allegedly predict everything from marital bliss to battlefield survival. One Lombard nobleman reportedly dismissed a wet nurse because his son kept kicking her with his scholar's foot, fearing her influence would weaken his warrior spirit. Parallels to contemporary parenting are striking. Where medieval families scrutinized footsteps, today's parents dissect zodiac signs or Myers-Briggs types, both seeking roadmaps for a child's unknowable future. The key difference: modern astrology offers wiggle room. Your Libra baby might be diplomatic or indecisive, while medieval foot readings carried starker consequences. Left-footed boys in martial cultures sometimes faced pressure to correct their nature through rigorous swordsmanship training, while right-footed girls destined for motherhood might be denied book learning altogether. Yet the first step was just one thread in a richer tapestry of childhood divination. In Scandinavia, midwives floated newborns in wooden bowls. If the vessel drifted north, the child would be adventurous. If it spun east, pious. Welsh bards inspected the walls of a baby's hair for musical Chinese letter, while Italian grandmothers swore that sneezing during a baptism meant the child would excel at languages. These weren't idle superstitions. They were survival strategies in an era when infant mortality could reach 30%. Faced with such fragility, parents clung to any sign that might hint at a child's resilience or purpose. What's poignant is how these rituals mirror today's baby gender reveals and develop mental apps, both eras seeking reassurance that this tiny, mysterious person will thrive. We've traded foot readings for footprint scans, but the longing remains to know just a little sooner who our children will become. This obsession with childhood destiny sets the stage for another custom where potential wasn't just predicted, it was physically shaped. At the crack of dawn, a single resonant note echoed across the English countryside, not a hunting call, but a carefully timed signal from the village Hayward's horn. This was the official start of commoning time, when livestock could finally graze on shared meadows after the grasses had grown tall enough to sustain them. The Hayward wasn't just a horn blower, he was medieval Europe's original environmental manager, balancing the needs of hungry animals with the land's fragile recovery. His horn's call marked the precise moment when communal pastures were ready, not a day sooner, lest overgrazing doom next season's growth. In some villages, the horn also signaled when grazing must cease, creating a sustainable rhythm that kept both herds and grasslands thriving for generations. This system reveals how deeply medieval communities understood ecological interdependence. The Hayward often walked the fields daily, inspecting grass height like a living barometer. His decisions weren't arbitrary, they followed ancient bylaws etched into village charters, specifying exact blade lengths before grazing could begin. Yorkshire records from 1421 detail fines for farmers who sneaked animals onto commons early, their impatience literally nipping the future in the bud. What seems like a simple horn blast was actually a sophisticated conservation tool, enforcing rules we'd now call rotational grazing or sustainable yields. Modern zoning battles over park usage or fishing quotas echo these medieval tensions, where Haywards used horns to prevent the tragedy of the commons. Today's environmental officers issue permits or set hunting seasons, same principle, different tools. The key difference: medieval villagers heard their limits in a single, unifying sound, while contemporary regulations arrive as dense legal packets few ever read. There's something to be said for the immediacy of that horn, cutting through debate with a note everyone understood, yet the Hayward's role extended beyond ecology. His horn also settled disputes before they began. When two farmers argued over whose sheep strayed first, the Hayward's records, often notched on tally sticks, provided impartial evidence. In Dorset, 15th century, Hayward kept meticulous wax tablet notes about which flocks grazed where, effectively serving as both referee and scribe. This blend of roles hints at how medieval life wove together practical needs and communal trust. The legacy of these horn signals lingers in unexpected places. Swiss alpine herders still mark seasonal grazing shifts with elaborate horn calls, while some English villages revive the tradition during heritage festivals. Even the concept of business hours owes a debt to these acoustic boundaries. Both use time as a shared agreement to prevent chaos. What's lost in translation is the physical intimacy of the system. A Hayward knew his land's contours like a musician knows his instrument, sensing when the meadow needed rest by the crunch of soil underfoot. Today's satellite-monitored crop rotations achieve similar ends, but without that visceral connection between human breath, animal hunger, and the Earth's quiet resilience. This deep-rooted cooperation sets the stage for another medieval innovation where survival depended not on laws, but on the unspoken rhythm of shared labor. Walking through a medieval village, your nose would catch the scent before your eyes found the source: a long wooden pole jutting from a doorway, its end darkened with stale ale. This was the ale stake, the original pub sign that didn't just say, "Drinks here," but screamed strength and quality through its very length. The longer and more ale sodden the pole, the more potent the brew inside, a marketing tactic so straightforward, even the drunkest patron couldn't miss it. Tavern keepers would soak these steaks in their best batches, letting the drips dry into a sticky patina that signaled, "This isn't weak cider." Some establishments took pride in never taking their pole down, letting it grow so heavy with layers of dried ale that it sagged like a drunken sailor at dawn. The ale steak wasn't just medieval advertising, it was a social contract. A short, clean steak might hint at watered-down swill, while a gnarled, ale-blackened beam promised a night of legendary revelry. This led to the phrase, getting poleaxed, a term we still use for overindulgence, though few realize it traces back to these boozy benchmarks. The system was ingeniously self-regulating. Cheat your customers with weak beer, and your steak would stay suspiciously pristine. Serve honest, robust brews, and your reputation quite literally hung out for all to see. Compare that to today's flashy neon signs and QR code happy hours. Where medieval drinkers judged a tavern by the physical evidence of its ale steak, we're bombarded with digital ratings and influencer endorsements. Yet the core principle hasn't changed: trust matters. A crumpled 5-star sign in a bar window serves the same purpose as those ale-drenched poles, proof that others have ventured inside and lived to tell the tale. But the ale steak's legacy goes deeper than marketing. These poles were early community hubs, their presence marking safe spaces for travelers to rest or locals to gossip. In London's Cheapside district, records show ale steaks became so large they obstructed horse traffic, leading to laws limiting their length, a medieval version of zoning regulations. Some taverns even notched their steaks to denote specialty brews, like triple-hopped ales or spiced meads, creating a coded language for regulars. What's fascinating is how these crude sticks evolved. By the 15th century, some ale steaks sprouted decorative ends, carved hops, wheat sheaves, or even animal shapes, laying the groundwork for the ornate pub signs we know today. The transition from functional to artistic mirrors societies shift from mere survival to savoring life's pleasures. Yet for all our progress, we've lost something tactile in the process. No app can replicate the thrill of running your fingers along an ale steak's sticky ridges, feeling the weight of generations of merriment soaked into the grain. As we near the end of our journey through forgotten customs, the ale steak reminds us that medieval life wasn't all plague and piety. It was also about finding joy in shared moments, one honest pint at a time. And speaking of honesty, our final customs reveal how our ancestors handled truth and consequences in ways that would make even the most seasoned bartender blush. Inside the stone walls of a Cistercian monastery, silence wasn't just a rule, it was a sacred language. These medieval monks took vows of silence so seriously that they invented an entire vocabulary of gestures, turning their hands into living dictionaries. Need to request a book? Form your fingers into the shape of pages opening. Speaking to the barber, mimic scissors snipping near your hairline. Even abstract concepts like patience had signs, a slow, deliberate pressing of palms together as if holding back an invisible force. This silent alphabet wasn't crude pantomime. It was a sophisticated system where slight variations in finger placement could distinguish bread from book or prayer from penance. Manuscripts from 12th century Clairvaux Abbey detail over 150 distinct signs, creating a hushed linguistic world where every flick of the wrist carried meaning. What makes this custom remarkable is how it transformed limitation into artistry. Where modern minds might see deprivation, no laughter in the halls, no whispered confessions, the monks found profound freedom. Their gestures became more than tools, they were acts of mindfulness, forcing careful thought before every word. A Cluniac chronicler describes novices spending months mastering the subtleties, how brushing fingertips downward meant fish, but upward meant feather, teaching them to weigh each concept like gold dust. This deliberate pace fostered a culture where communication wasn't disposable, but sacred. Compare that to today's rapid-fire texts and voice notes, where words spill out faster than thoughts can form. The system's elegance lay in its adaptability. Regional monasteries developed dialects. A circular hand motion might mean cheese in Burgundy but moon in Catalonia. Some signs even encoded humor. One satirical manuscript shows monks using exaggerated gestures to mock overly strict abbots behind their backs. This reveals the human truth beneath the piety. Even in silence, people find ways to laugh, critique, and connect. Modern parallels exist in unexpected places. Baseball catchers' hand signals, surgical teams' silent cues, even emoji keyboards, all descend from the same need to communicate without sound. Yet none carry the spiritual weight of those monastic gestures, where moving one's hands wasn't just about conveying information but honoring a higher calling. This tradition's legacy isn't just in the gestures themselves, but in what they represent, the radical idea that sometimes the deepest truths aren't spoken at all. As we conclude our journey through forgotten customs, we're reminded that history's quietest innovations often echo loudest across time. The moment a vassal's lips touched his lord's ring, an entire social order was sealed in that fleeting press of flesh to metal. This feudal kiss wasn't just a greeting, it was a living contract performed on bended knee with hands clasped around the lord's palm, as if cradling the very power that sustained him. In the great halls of Normandy and the castles of Aragon, this ritual transformed abstract loyalty into something visceral. The lord's hand might smell of leather or iron, the ring cold against the vassal's mouth, imprinting the hierarchy deeper than any parchment. What made the act profound was its intimacy. Unlike modern signatures on distant documents, feudal bonds were literally felt the brush of a beard against a cheek during the osculum kiss, the weight of a signet ring imprinting wax and skin alike. This custom reveals feudalism's core paradox, a system built on personal connection that ultimately demanded absolute submission. The kiss looked like affection but functioned as domination. Chroniclers describe lords testing vassals by withdrawing their hand at the last second, forcing the inferior to grovel further. In Sicily, some nobles used grotesquely oversized rings to exaggerate the act of submission, while German knights reportedly gritted their teeth when kissing bishops' rings, resenting the church's temporal power. The ritual's theater was precise. The lord remained seated, the vassal knelt, and the kiss's duration signaled status. A duke might merit 3 seconds of lip-to-ring contact, a minor knight barely one. Yet the feudal kiss wasn't just about power, it was about precarious power. Unlike modern states with their impersonal institutions, medieval rule depended on constant physical reaffirmation. A lord who skipped his vassal's kisses risked seeming weak, while a vassal who refused them invited war. This explains why the ritual surged during crises when Henry Roman II faced rebellion. He demanded fresh oaths sealed with kisses from every baron. The act's physicality made betrayal harder. It's one thing to break a silent vow, another to violate a bond literally embodied in touch. The kiss's decline mirrored feudalism's unraveling. As kings centralized power, loyalty shifted from persons to abstract crowns. By the 16th century, Spanish grandees kissed the royal hand rather than the ring, then just the air above it, a symbolic retreat from intimacy. Today's handshakes between leaders preserve a ghost of this ritual, but without the hierarchy. When two presidents clasp hands, neither kneels, yet echoes linger. Soldiers still kiss flags during enlistment, athletes medal podiums, and new citizens touch constitutions, all secular sacraments where objects stand in for sovereigns. The Feudal Kiss reminds us that before loyalty was to nations or ideals, it was to the calloused hands of another human, warm and imperfect. In an age of digital contracts, perhaps we've gained efficiency but lost the weight of what it means to feel allegiance, not just pledge it. As we close this journey through forgotten customs, consider how many modern traditions began as practical solutions to medieval problems. From handshakes to wedding rings, we still live among the ghosts of gestures past, even if we've forgotten their original weight. The past isn't dead, it's just waiting for us to notice it whispering through our daily rituals. From bread plates to love spoons, sin eaters to dancing plagues, these 25 forgotten customs aren't just quirks of history, they're masterclasses in human ingenuity. Every trencher eaten, every curse stone touched, every ale stake hung reveals how medieval people turned everyday struggles into rituals rich with meaning. They feared storms, so they banned whistling. They craved justice, so they put pigs on trial. They longed for love, so they carved promises into wood. What unites these traditions isn't their strangeness, but their profound humanity, the same creativity, community, and hunger for connection that still shape our lives today. Look around and you'll spot medieval logic hiding in plain sight. That bridal shower gift registry, it's the great-great-grandchild of the bride's barrel. The way we shake hands at business meetings, a sanitized version of checking for hidden daggers. Even our obsession with viral challenges echoes the Charivari's mob mentality. Only now, instead of pots and pans, we wield hashtags. The difference is scale, not substance. Our ancestors used rituals to navigate uncertainty, just as we do. When medieval peasants danced to ward off plague, they weren't so unlike modern crowds clapping for healthcare workers during lockdowns, both turning fear into collective action. So which customs might come roaring back? In an age of disposable everything, the trencher's zero-waste feasts feel oddly modern. Hand-carved love spoons could thrive in our handmade, anti-algorithm era. And after years of social distancing, the Lord of Misrule's raucous role reversal might be just what we need. The past never truly vanishes, it adapts. Those monastic hand signals, they'd fit right in with today's silent Zoom meetings. The sin bell's call for mercy, it whispers through prison reform debates. As you scroll through comments sharing your favorite oddity, maybe the foot-kissing bishops or the ale wives' witchy hats remember this. History's so-called dark ages were actually blazing with light. Every custom we've explored was somebody's brilliant solution to being human in a chaotic world. That's why the past fascinates us. It's not a foreign country. It's home, so hit subscribe because hidden history keeps unfolding. Who knows, the next forgotten custom might be lurking in your grandmother's recipe book or your local pub's quirks. After all, the past isn't just strange, it's a mirror. And sometimes the reflection staring back is wearing a pointed hat and holding a tankard of ale. Cheers to